Times have changed. In the mid-80s, President Ronald Reagan and King Fahd colluded to crash the oil markets, making it financially impossible for the then Soviet Union to continue its Afghanistan venture. Oil markets were decimated. War in Afghanistan became financially untenable for Moscow and the Soviet Union disintegrated. Fast forward, and oil continues to be a tool in the hands of the major stakeholders to advance geopolitical objectives. The players in this geopolitical game today continue to be the same. Interestingly though, they are aligned differently. Then Saudi Arabia, the United States and Pakistan, for its proximity to Afghanistan, were aligned to humiliate and annihilate the then superpower, the Soviet Union. Today, it is a different ballgame. Riyadh, in the company of Moscow, is standing up today to Washington. When the COVID pandemic hit the world, oil market prices crashed. It has been an uphill task for the OPEC and their allies in the extended OPEC Plus to put a floor under the market oil prices. Slashing output remained their only tool. The Ukraine crisis, however, added another variable to the global energy equation. The United States and its European allies wanted to cut off Russian energy exports to make the war on Ukraine financially untenable for Putin. But that also meant global energy markets would get tight and prices would soar. In a mid-election year, President Biden could not have afforded that. He looked towards Saudi Arabia, often termed the global gas station, to raise output and cool the energy markets. To persuade Riyadh to increase output and break the alliance with Moscow in the OPEC Plus, Biden even agreed to reverse his campaign promise of making Saudi Arabia a pariah state, undertaking a trip to Saudi Arabia. After the trip, the US officials thought they had clinched a deal with Saudi Arabia to boost oil supplies through the end of the year. That optimism turned out to be wrong. Riyadh is playing cautious. With hikes in global interest rates, a slowdown in China due to its zero COVID-19 strategy, and talks of an imminent global recession, producers do not seem prepared for any financial meltdown. Washington's plan to impose a price cap on Russian crude oil exports is also a cause of concern to OPEC producers. They fear the measure could be used against them in the future. Further, the US pledged to transition from oil and usher in a new clean energy era while leaning on OPEC to keep oil prices low, and the decision to begin releasing crude from its emergency reserves was enough to ring alarm bells among the OPEC oil producers. So, when OPEC Plus met in Vienna, rather than increasing the output as demanded by Biden, they opted to cut it by 2 million barrels per day. Unsurprisingly, this infuriated Washington, and talks of consequences for Riyadh began on Capitol Hill. Saudi officials say politics was not involved in their decision to cut output. Since Riyadh is heavily dependent on oil revenues, it needs to put its own economic interests ahead of domestic US political considerations. Unfortunately for the US, elbowing Russia out of the global energy markets is not easy. The crisis now is much bigger than in 1973. For now, gas, oil, coal and every energy source is under the hammer. Europe is dependent upon Russian gas supplies, and for it to survive without Russian gas and oil is proving to be extremely difficult. If not impossible, the concern is growing in Europe. There were large protests in Prague recently, chanting, "Why should we suffer for Zelensky?" The same sentiments are growing in the UK as in Germany. Even the US is not immune to it. LNG is no solution. With demand soaring, LNG prices are going up. Those who can afford it are clinching deals, but Europe too cannot afford the high-cost LNG for long. It has already begun extracting a political price for itself. It is also creating a crisis-like scenario for LNG-dependent countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and to some extent India. Affordable LNG is not available to them. Ever since the 1973 Arab oil embargo, the United States and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, countries kept insisting upon oil producers that oil is not a political tool to advance geopolitical objectives. It is a commercial product to sell and should be treated as that. Now is the time for Biden to learn the lesson. Otherwise, markets are in for major chaos.